Welcome to Employee Benefit Plans and Business Sense.
Hello and welcome back to Employee Benefit Plans and Business Sense with Dahl, Lank, and Kathleen Salas-Bass of KLB Benefits Law Group. Dahl and Kathleen help employers and benefit plan service providers navigate the complex legal requirements of employee benefit plans. With decades of combined experience in employee benefits law, they guide clients through the compliance matters, corrections, IRS, and DOL audits. I'm your host, Lisa Mosbey, and today we're talking about group retirement arrangements and how options like MEPs, PEPs, and DCGs compare to standalone plans. Ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having us.
You know, Dahl, how are group plans different from standalone or single employer plans?
Generally, there are lots of different kinds of group plans, but a group plan or a group of plans is a technical term distinguishing those types of plans from a single employer plan. And the main difference is that in combining with other employers to hire an administrator to run the plan, the employers that participate in a group are reducing their fiduciary exposure to liability and their fees generally. So it's more cost effective to be in a group of plans, and it does reduce fiduciary liability substantially.
And I'd also say, importantly, a single employer plan can have more than one employer participating, but they're in a related group, like a control group. Whereas in these plans that Dahl's talking about, they don't need to be related. They can be, not in the same control group or affiliate service group. So they get this benefit of these reduced costs that Dahl was talking about, even though they are actually not related to each other. They just kind of come together for that purpose.
And then, Dahl, can you share with us what the pros and cons of sponsoring retirement benefits via MEP, PEP, or a DCG are?
The pros are reduced expense generally, right from the beginning by sharing in a group of plans with any form of group of plans with other employers who can number in the dozens or even hundreds perhaps. You can reduce your share of expenses. And these expenses that are unavoidable for any retirement plan include testing, all of the compliance testing of the employee population and their benefits, the 5500 reporting preparation, the investment expenses, that's the hiring somebody to advise the plan on what investments can be in the plan. And the professionals that do these activities, the registered investment advisor, the third-party administrator, these sometimes a plan auditor, CPA that handles a plan audit, those expenses can be very exorbitant for a single employer to bear. And when they join in a group, and in certain groups, the 5500 testing and the audit testing can be combined, and you can get a substantial reduction in your per employer cost. So that's a real pro. The cons for moving in for a multiple employer plan are probably the biggest single contrary would be lack of flexibility. When you select a group of plans, you're choosing a fixed set of service providers that has been organized by the main administrator of the plan, the sponsor of the plan, if you will, the host of the plan. And you can choose among many, many different groups to find an arrangement that suits you, but you don't have flexibility once you pick that arrangement, that set of professionals, the set of plan benefits. You have less flexibility in plan design than you would if you remained in a single employer plan. And I think I sort of was hinting at the other con, I suppose, of a group of plans is moving into one it requires some effort. So if you're in a single employer plan today, which most employers in the country who do sponsor plans are in a single employer plan, if you think, oh, I heard that it's cheaper to be in a group, I want to do that, there's going to be some effort and expense in transitioning to that cheaper model. It's not just it's not just an obvious, inexpensive solution. You need to think about what you're going to do to transition into that. So the transition can be a little bit of a hassle, although I personally think it's worthwhile. And then as I said, the reduction in fees is key. In certain groups of plans, not all of them, in certain groups of plans, there's a significant reduction in fiduciary liability.
And Dahl, what types of employers tend to be a good fit for these group arrangements?
I think that small employers that don't need a plan audit, particularly, and that would be people who employ or have fewer than 100 participants in their plan. So this describes many employers in the country. And if you also are small and in the sense of revenues, you don't have a lot of money to spend on employee benefits operations, you need to be lean and cost effective. And being in a group of plans such as a multiple employer plan or a pooled employer plan or a defined contribution group, those alternative groups can offer a much cheaper alternative for the small employer. Another point for smaller employers or any employer who does not have in-house HR departments. The Human Resources Department in a large employer often handles the employee benefits very well in-house and works with their providers with a lot of training in-house and redundancies of staff to help with covering issues when somebody's on vacation, for example. A large HR department can handle that is nimble, can kind of handle that kind of single employer plan situation. But if you're in a small company and you don't have your own HR department in-house, you probably need the help of an administrator that's more prepared to outside in the group of plans. That the group of plans administrator usually will suffice to provide all the expertise you need in connection with ERISA compliance and other things that otherwise that larger employers have in house.
Dow, I want to do a little definition, just to create some clarity around this. Can you tell us what a multiple employer plan is, and then also defined contribution group of plans? What's the difference, and share a little bit more detail, please?
Well, multiple employer plans have been around the longest of any of the groups of plans. They've been strong in the market over the past 20 years. And those multiple employer plans were an initial attempt in the early 21st century for smaller employers to band together and get some cost efficiencies. And they decided these providers sprang up in the market to conglomerate and set up a fixed group of service providers for a bunch of employers. And when that started to take off in the market, the Department of Labor had a bit of a response to those arrangements under ERISA and started issuing a lot of regulations about multiple employer plans or MEPs, as we call them. And so MEPs, after, say, 20 years or so, MEPs became somewhat commonplace. They were no longer exotic. There was plenty of regulation to support them. But then when the Secure Act of 2022, the Secure Act 2.0 is what we call it, when that was enacted a few years ago, the Congress enabled this defined contribution group, which is a sort of modern version of a MEP, and it's a new statutory creature, so it's separate from a MEP, but it's probably will replace MEPs over time because it's intended to provide the same efficiencies as a multiple employer plan without having the need for there to be a nexus or any kind of connection among the employers. The way that there is in a multiple employer plan. So defined contribution group has a professional administrator who is organizing this group of plans, this group of employers, and they can file one 5500, and they have a lot of cost efficiencies associated with them, without a lot of the burden of the multiple employer plans. The biggest problem with multiple employer plans is that if they are set up by employers who don't have any other relationship with each other than the plan, then it's difficult for the real cost effectiveness to come in. It creates some compliance complexities that disappear with the defined contribution group.
And we do have another one called a pooled employer plan. How is that one different? Does that pick up the slack from the other two?
Yeah, well, the pooled employer plans is interesting. It's even more aggressive or more expansive, I guess. It also came through in Secure 2.0, and it's an additional benefit of the pooled employer plan, or PEP, is that it legally reduces, by statute, by this in the Secure Act this happened, it legally reduces the liability of the employer sponsoring the plan and puts most of the fiduciary liability for the plan on the plan administrator. So it's an out and out reduction of fiduciary liability by Congress for the very first time since ERISA was enacted in 1974. It's a reduction of fiduciary liability for the employer sponsoring the plan. So a PEP is, most of the fiduciary liability is assumed by the PEP provider, which is called a PPP, a PEP plan provider. The PEP plan provider is the lead fiduciary. They are in charge of the data that's in the 5500. They are in charge of hiring the investment advisor and approving investments for the plan. They're in charge of a plan audit in the event that there's an audit. And they take those costs and share them out among their clients, no doubt. But it's cost effective like any group of plans. But there's an actual legal protection for the employers participating in a PEP because they simply don't have that under statute. They just don't have as much liability as the pooled plan provider.
Another thing I thought I would mention when Dahl was kind of talking earlier about the fact that one of the downsides is the difficulty in transferring into a PEP or a MEP. And part of that, and also the limited choices, part of that is that those, the sponsor of those plans, they have a single plan document that they maintain, and then they offer the employers who are participating in those plans limited choices, the choices that they, as the PPP, the choices that they want to administer, they only offer those. So it offers that limited set. And everyone who joins that plan has to adopt that plan. So they're now changing from whatever their prior plan document was, if they had one, and they're having to adopt the PEP or MEPs. But I believe, and Dahl, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the DCG, one of the nice things about that is everyone can have their own existing plan document. They don't have to go through that step of going on to the same identical plan document.
Right. That's a good point. Yes. Yeah, the DCG, the defined contribution group, creates some efficiencies and preserves some flexibility. So to sum up the differences among the groups, there are at least 3 different types of group of plans, and there's 2 different kinds of MEPs. There's also the defined contribution group and the PEP. Those variations among those products can seem subtle to an employer shopping. So it would be very advisable for an employer considering moving into a group to do some research, hire a consultant, ask peers and colleagues what their experiences have been with these different groups, shop with a good eye as a consumer, shop to protect yourself as a consumer, make sure that you approve of who the providers are and that they've got a good track record. All of the things that go into it. But the difference here, if you say, well, I want to file a single 5500, but do I want the flexibility of my own plan design? If you're agonizing about all this stuff swirling around as an employer sponsoring the benefit for their employees, those are great questions. And you need to ask all of the questions in the context of the current market, which has this great array. There's actually a variety of single employer plans too. You can go from very simple to much more complex. And then there's the group of plans. So the ERISA retirement plan world has expanded enormously in the past, say, 20 years.
The detail that you went into on this is excellent. And I would like to be able to try to pull that all together, maybe give us an example of where an employer moved into one of these plans and what that looked like for them.
The example I think of is just theoretical. Actually, I haven't experienced anything this clean, but it should be that a single employer who's small, say their revenues are $1 million a year, they employ 20 people. They want those people to have a retirement benefit. They've got a safe harbor plan, which is a fairly easy to administer plan that has a 401k feature, which means that employees are entitled to defer part of their salary into the plan and save on a tax deferred basis. So this employer is happy to give their 20 people this great benefit, but it's costing them a few, say $5,000 a year or more, plus a little bit of extra training in-house to make sure their staff can handle administering this plan on the in-house side. And they are also stuck with the redundancies. They need not only trained staff, but have enough staff to cover vacations and things like that to handle their plan. That single employer who's, say, spending $6,000 a year administering their plan could look at a group of plans, any one of them, and move into something that's a product that has the same exact features. I'm not talking about a fancy employer plan. Most employer plans are pretty simple. It's a safe harbor plan, maybe with an employer match of a few percentage points of salary. Those are easy to replicate in a group. And they could move to a group that once they've moved, the cost could be something like $2,000 a year for administration costs. And they get to move, if they're in a PEP, they could move all of many of the in-house operations can be outsourced to the PEP provider. So they're looking for the cost of the PEP itself is just it's a third, say, of the cost of administering the single employer plan, and they don't have to worry so much about the in-house bandwidth. So that's an example where a common plan design could probably move into a group of some sort, more and end up in a more cost-effective basis than they are today.
That's a great example. Thank you for tying that all together. Here's where I want to leave it. I'm curious, what are some of the common issues that come up after joining a group plan?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that employers make in connection with any retirement plan of any type is assuming that it's not their plan. A lot of employers adopt a plan, especially when they're a small employer and they're busy, and these plan professionals that are helping them do a great job. They're very efficient, and they take over the tasks, right? And the employer is so relieved that they forget that they have anything to do with the plan, that their duties don't disappear with a group of plans or with any plan. The employer must keep their eyes on what the service provider is doing, what's happening with the plan. Is the 5500 being filed? They don't have to file it, perhaps, if they're with a PEP, for example, but they have to know that it has been filed and it's complete. They need to keep their eyes on it a little bit. They also have some regular duties in-house that just can't go away. They can't be delegated away, which include payroll. If your plan includes your salary deferrals from payroll, you are in charge in-house of your payroll, even if you have a payroll provider who is automatically calculating things and sending those contributions to the plan for the employees. That's great. That's the modern world. It's electronic, it's instantaneous, but the employer needs to make sure that the payroll is complete, timely, accurate, that all sorts of details that are in the plan provisions that they are reflected in payroll. So I think the biggest mistake that people can make after joining a group or joining any kind of great plan with a great provider is think that they're done. They never have to do anything again. That's just not true.
Dal, Kathleen, thank you so much for sharing your guidance today and stepping us through this process. It can be complicated, but you've made it very understandable, shine some great light on it. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Lisa.
To our listeners, thank you so much for listening to Employee Benefit Plans and Business Sense. If you're considering a group retirement arrangement or want help understanding whether a MEP, PEP, or DCG makes sense for your organization, visit klblawgroup.com to connect with Dal and Kathleen. Be sure to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.